Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here to do the memory book tag. This tag was originally created by Katie from A Sea of Tomes, and she was also the one who tagged me, so I will link her down below. Number 1, early years. What's the first book you can remember reading by yourself? I actually had a really hard time with this, so I'm gonna go with one of the first books I remember like seeking out in class and reading by myself. I'm sure I read books by myself before this, but for some reason the one that kept popping into my head was the Junie B. Jones series. I don't remember the author at all. I just remember that this was one of those series where I would go to our little like book area in first grade and seek out like if there were new books there. And yeah, Junie B. Jones. Specifically I remember the fruitcake one. For some reason that like really stuck in my mind, but I know I was reading books by myself before that, like in kindergarten and before, but that's my answer. Number 2, school. Discuss a book you had to read for school that you have strong memories about. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to go with a poem, actually, and please forgive my Latin. I do not speak Latin, but it was Dulce et decorum est, and I think that was by Wilfred Owen. And we read that actually in 12th grade, and one of the poems he chose was Dulce et decorum est. And the reason I have so many strong memories about this is because for the longest time, like basically my whole life up to that point, I had thought I really didn't like poetry. And I have no reason for that. I don't remember a particular experience that made me decide I didn't like poetry. I just always had it in my head that like I'm a book person. Like poetry is not for me. It's very pretentious and it doesn't mean anything, and like I just didn't like it. And then I read that poem and it stuck with me for so long, to the point where like actually this year I was working on a project that involved searching out World War I poetry, and I remembered that one specifically and I looked it up. Reading that poem was just such a visceral and powerful experience, and the fact that that poem is what convinced me that I could enjoy poetry. Like it changed my mind about an entire range of written work that I had thought I had made up my mind I didn't enjoy, and like that poem is just so incredible, and it's bleak, but it's beautiful in the way that it's written, and I cannot say enough wonderful things about it. I'm definitely going to link it down below, and I encourage you to read it because it really did change the way I viewed certain kinds of literature. Number 3, family. Talk about a book you remember reading with your parents. And I was very lucky. My parents read a lot with me and my brother and sister, but I'm gonna go with one that I'm pretty sure our mom was the only one who ever read this one to us, even though my dad did read to us. And that was The English Roses, and it's by Madonna. And I chose this one because I just have, like, this is one of the coziest read aloud memories I have. And the illustrations were so beautiful, and the story was so beautiful. It's about female friendship, so I think that was definitely an important establishing moment for me as a young reader. But it was about not judging people based on appearances and how you never know what's going on in someone's life. And I loved the art, and I just remember sitting down with my sister and my mom reading this book to us, and it was just such a like warm memory. Number 4, midnight. Talk about a book you remember staying up late to read or finish. I probably have more answers for this than I should have, but I'm just gonna go with one, and that is Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. But specifically, I'm talking about the first one, and I think it might have even been me rereading this book, so I didn't really have an excuse for why I had to stay up late and read it. I have such a specific memory about when this happened, because I would be reading, I don't remember if I had a flashlight or if I had already had my light installed by my bed or whatever, but I'd be reading it, and then I could hear my mom like start to come down the hall, and I would like flip off the light and I'd like pull the covers over and I'd hide the book under the covers, like, you know, in like TV shows when they always show kids reading under the covers. Like I actually kind of did that, except not all the way under the covers. And I specifically remember I was at the part of the first book where the troll incident happens. Like that was the part I specifically remember almost getting caught because my mom came in, and she might have caught me one time when I did that, probably more than one time. But at the time I was like, Mom, you're being so unreasonable. I just want to stay up and read. And of course she was like, you have school the next morning. Like, I want to take care of you. You shouldn't be doing this. But, you know, I clearly knew better. Number 5, holiday. Talk about a bookish memory from the holidays. And I chose Christmas, and the book I chose was The Nutcracker by E.T.A. Hoffman, and this is the one that is illustrated by Maurice Sendak. And I think I've mentioned this briefly before. The reason I have so many good memories associated with this book is, for one thing, Christmas is my favorite time of year. It's my favorite holiday. Like, the funny thing about this memory is I'm not actually sure we ever finished this book at Christmas time, but I remember multiple years in a row, like we would figure out these fun things we wanted to do over the winter break, and like for Christmas specifically, and we almost always had this book as like on that list, and like this idea that it was going to be this really fun like family read aloud, and every year we wouldn't finish it. Like we would get distracted by other Christmas books, or we would just be like doing other things with our family. So I love that this was like this eternally hopeful, like we're gonna get to it this year. But I did eventually read this by myself, and I did end up really enjoying it. And I just want to show you some of the illustrations. And if you've read the original Nutcracker story, it's very different, I think, from a lot of adaptations. It's really strange and surprisingly dark, an unusual kind of memory to think of fondly, but yeah, I loved almost reading this book. Like we even got multiple chapters into it and it just never happened, like all the way through. Number 6, passion. Talk about a book that helped shape you, i.e. a career path, an area you enjoy, etc. And do you guys remember the Magic Tree House nonfiction companion books? Because I think it was the third one. I don't remember what it was called, if it was like Ancient Egypt or like Mummies and Pyramids or what. I'll insert a picture, but I loved that book. I must have reread this thing I don't even know how many times. We had the first few nonfiction books, but this was the one I kept coming back to. Even if it didn't create my love for ancient Egyptian history and culture and myth and all of that, I think it definitely solidified it, and I really enjoyed reading that book multiple times. Number 7, travel. Discuss a book you read on vacation or a trip that brings up fond memories. I'm going to go with Cheaper by the Dozen by Ernestine Gilbreth Carey and Frank B. Gilbreth Jr., I think. So this is like actually a nonfiction, kind of a biography of their dad, and he was an efficiency expert, and their whole family is just so interesting, and for some, like, this is a very cozy feeling book. I remember years ago, I brought it with me to reread, because this is a book I reread over and over because I just enjoyed it that much. I brought it with me when my mom and I went to visit family of hers, like in the Midwest, and normally our whole family would go, but my brother and sister had like a commitment that they had to stay for, so my dad stayed with them, so it was just me and my mom. And the reason I had such a good memory associated with this is because this is one of the first times I remember my mom and I reading the same book. She ended up picking this up because I had kind of casually mentioned what it was about and that I really enjoyed it, and she just like, she read I think the whole thing in 1 or 2 days. And my mom is like so busy, and she's always running around like making other people's lives easier. So for her to like devote that much time to a book, even like to doing something for herself like that was a really big deal. And it was just so much fun to get to discuss it with her. And I think that was, like I said, I think that was one of the first books that we had read that was the same, because our reading taste didn't really overlap too much before that. So I just have good memories associated with that, of like spending time with my mom and getting to talk about books with her. Number 8, hideaway. Discuss one of your favorite places to read and why it's one of your favorites. So I'm gonna go with my bunk bed from when I was younger. I actually had a bunk bed for a really long time, and I slept on the top bunk because I was the big sister and I wanted to. And specifically, I'm gonna talk about when I got a night light, like a reading light actually, installed that was like on the wall and that I could reach over and turn on so I could read up there. And I loved that because my house was like pretty loud. So whenever I wanted to read, it's like I have to find somewhere where there wasn't a TV on or where people weren't talking or like things like that. And even though I liked some background noise, I really liked having kind of my own space where I could just like it was my bed. Like nobody else could come up here. It was my bed. So I really enjoyed that, having my own kind of cozy little like reading nest. It was really nice. Number 9, life changes. Name a book that helped you with a big life change, i.e. going to college, dealing with a breakup, etc. So I'm gonna go with kind of a recent one, and that is The Poetry of Mary Oliver. More than like a specific life event, her poetry found me at a time I really needed it. I was going through some really bad things over this last summer of 2018. I was just going through a really hard time. Like specific poems of hers kept finding me at moments when I needed them. Like I think this happened 1 or 2, possibly even 3 times, and it wasn't until very recently that I realized they were all by the same poet, which inspired me to seek out more of her work. And if you're interested, a couple of the poems I mean specifically were I think Wild Geese, which is a very famous one of hers, and another famous one of hers, which is When Death Comes, which is surprisingly uplifting and beautiful despite the title. And I just really appreciated her style of writing. And actually she just died a couple of days ago, and even though I had discovered her so recently, I felt such an immense sense of loss because I had only discovered how important she was to me recently. And I remembered I was at work when I found out, and I just sat there for 10 minutes like crying at my desk off and on because of how much her work meant to me, and and like how much it had gotten me through things. And I felt like I had missed out because I had discovered it so late. But anyway, I'm gonna stop before I get too emotional about it, but I just think she was an incredibly talented poet, and it really angers me that she is written off as being too sweet or too positive, and I think there's a lot of misogyny tied up in that as well. But I think for her to have such a talent for describing the beauty of life with the suffering too, I think that is a really powerful gift and something that not a lot of people have. And I just like the way that she meets you where you are. You know, if you read her poetry when you're feeling very bleak and hopeless, and she kind of lifts you out of that, not by making you feel like you're silly for being upset about things, but by kind of like acknowledging that bad things happen, but there are also good things. And I don't know if I'm describing any of this competently at all, but Mary Oliver is wonderful. And finally, number 10 is Stone. Discuss 3 books or series that imprinted on your soul and impacted you in many ways. I'm going to go in chronological order, and one of the first was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This is the book that got me into reading. It was one of the first things I remembered rereading over and over and over, and I love that I think it kind of protected me from being intimidated by classics, because like I didn't know what a classic novel was when I started reading this. I love the message of hope, but I also love that Mary Lennox, like, she doesn't just turn into this perfect sweet little girl. Like, she keeps her spunk and her fire, and I love that. I love the message about how people can make the decision to become better people, and how people's circumstances can affect the way they grow up, but that doesn't absolve you of responsibility for the choices you make. And I love this book so much. Next is a series, and that is the Artemis Fowl series by Owen Colfer. This is my tabbed copy, as you can see. I'm currently rereading it for the Artemis Fowl read-along that I am co-hosting, and this was such an influential series for me, and I think I'm only realizing as I get older how much of an impact it had on me. Like, not just I really enjoyed this series, and it was one of the first series I remember like actively anticipating the next books for, along with Harry Potter, but I just love this series so much. And I think that this was one of the ones, kind of along with The Secret Garden, that from a young age made me realize like character development, and by extension people's development. Like, people can become better, people can change. And I think this also kind of set me on my path of loving anti-heroes, or kind of like complex character arcs. And I just can't say enough wonderful things about this series. Every time I reread it, I am still astounded by how much I love the characters, and how much I enjoyed the world and the story, and just the really complex issues these books deal with about things like morality, and how far you're willing to go to protect people you care about. Like, the things that you might do that are bad, but if you're doing them for good reasons, does that make it okay? And things like that. And I just really love this series, and it was definitely a formative one. And I could have gone with Harry Potter too, but I think that's a very formative series for a lot of people, and I wanted to be a little more specific. So I'm actually going to go with a book that I read relatively recently in my reading life compared to those other two, and that is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. And I have talked about this book before, as with those other ones. This book was one of the things that made me realize that I'm never gonna stop being surprised at how much I love stories. Because I came across this book at a time when I think I was pretty confident about the fact that, like, I already know that books are wonderful. Like, I'm already a reader. Not that I couldn't find books I love, but I was kind of convinced that I probably wouldn't find another book that really surprised me with how much it affected me. I don't know if that distinction makes sense. But in my head, that's kind of where I was. And then I read this book, and I understand it's a very polarizing book. I know that a lot of people have been reading it lately and being disappointed because it doesn't live up to the hype. And I understand that. The writing style, the concept, the characters, they're very out there, and I think for a lot of people they wouldn't work. But for a lot of people they do, and I was one of those people. And this book just, oh my god, I don't even know how to talk articulately about this book, because it means so much to me, and because the compassion and the honesty and the way it talks about humanity, the kind of the highs and lows, like the terrible things that people can do, but also the really beautiful and wonderful things people can do, and the things it says about storytelling and how much storytelling matters, and some of these characters that I just like love so deeply. And I just, everything about this book really just speaks to my soul on a very, very personal, fundamental level, and that's why I'm including it on this list. Okay, everybody, so that was the memory book tag. I got a little unexpectedly emotional for some of that, but those are some books that I have very strong memories for. Please let me know down below if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or let me know in the comments if you guys have a book or series that you're only realizing now as an adult like how fundamentally it changed you or influenced you. Kind of like I was talking about with Artemis Fowl. I will tag a couple of people in the description, so please be sure to check that. But if you want to do this tag, definitely do it. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you again, Katie, for tagging me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!